So, two things that have relevance to this current investigation, which will look into uh, Jordan Peterson as a doorway to the question of what abstraction is and what the abstract is, are one, the Keats saying that from one of Keats' poems that all charms fly from the cold touch of philosophy, and other the simile of Friedrich Nietzsche, where he compares the where he says it's ridiculous. Pity is something ridiculous in the thinker, just as delicate hands would be on a cyclops, or I think in Greek it's cyclops, contrary to the English usual pronunciation. So if we say in Peterson, who suffered an illness recently, if we analyze that from the point of view of Erich Fromm, Fromm, we can say that illness demonstrates actually not a weakness, but a strength, where it's the proper reaction to a situation which is unhealthy. So in this sense, my thesis is that Peterson's essential career, where he's focused around the World War II period, has been mistaken, and in coming to some consciousness of that, he's fallen ill. So my view is that the reason, the fundamental motive of the Nazis, which doesn't excuse in any way anything that they did, was to avoid becoming beings such as ourselves, such as we are now, which is to say beings who take our core worth as beings from being tools of the economy. So, there's a statement of Eisenhower when he was stepping down for president, after becoming president after the war, where he spoke of the floorboards creaking with the military-industrial complex coming into the house. So this military-industrial complex stands at the head of the economy, which all beings today serve, and that's a very unhealthy situation. So this is what was foreseen already prior to it being established. And you can read Erich Fromm on that subject, who's very say more about that. But how does that look from the Heideggerian perspective, and how does this touch on this question of what is abstraction, and why is Heidegger always saying we're so content now without dealing with abstraction? So take a simple example of, for instance, a farmer's market. We have sort of pop-up farmers markets these days. You could also think of the Grand Bazaar in Damascus or some other kind of thing. But there's a certain change in the space, or the topos, which is also a change in the human beings when they are of that space. So you can say perhaps the produce and the fruits are genuinely of the space of the farmer's market, and maybe the farmers themselves, but then there's also the shoppers, and then you can say maybe at the margin there's somebody who's on his way to, or her way to some other place, simply enters into the farmer's market without being of it, simply because they're passing by and they don't really notice. Maybe something of being of it comes into their, affects them. But so then, by analogy, the whole world is like a topos, or a place which has a certain there's a being of it. There's merely being in it, but then there's people that are really of it. So perhaps it's difficult to say who's more of it. Mere success in terms of serving the economy doesn't necessarily say you're more of it than people that are unsuccessful. Maybe they're more of it rather than merely in it. So we can make this distinction of being of this essence, which really means something like, just as Nietzsche spoke of the actuality of the soldier and of the worker, worker in contradistinction to somebody who has a job or has a profession, but rather worker meaning primarily somebody who labors in a factory or something along those lines. I remember Seamus Heaney, I think is his name, the Irish poet who won the Nobel Prize. He related, he was born in the 30s or so, and he related that his parents in Ireland regarded anyone who didn't do actual manual labor as, as not working, like a teacher or somebody working behind a counter or something. They didn't consider that work. So there's a difference but for us, this general word work really means what we've already just gone through, this tool for serving the needs of the economy, which ultimately means the military-industrial complex. So in this sense, when Heidegger is speaking of the forgetfulness of the abstraction, what he means in a way is the forgetfulness of the possibility which is already there in anyone who becomes of a certain space, who enters into the service of that space and has it as part of their sense of what is practical, what ought to be done there, has a sort of captivation within that space. So in this way, that's one sense where staying with the actual and being comforted by the sense of being actual is actually an abstraction. So for instance, if we're in that farmer's market and then we would say, what's actually here is this particular apple or this man here or so, and then we ask the physicist to come in and Heidegger, in order to take orientation on how this build actuality is playing out in certain research projects, says Heisenberg and other Max Planck or whoever you like, is understanding the actual and the real according to what is measurable. So then you could say, isn't this an abstraction from the whole situation of the farmer's market, from the being of it, and also being there amidst the beings, which both go together in unity? Aren't we making an abstraction to only select the measurable there? Another meaning of abstraction is that reason in its origin, especially as it's worked out in Plato and Aristotle, as what's meant to be the human essence. Today there's a contest over what the human essence is, where in a way the human essence has become so-called quote-unquote subjectivity. Like the human being doesn't really matter because all our experiences are merely subjective. They're not rational, because we're incapable of rationality. We can only do measurement or talk about the actual. We can't talk about in a way you could say Heidegger's title could have been, rather than Sein und Zeit, it could have been Sein und Möglichkeit, was a being and possibility. So the exclusion of possibility from any research program that tries to say what reality is corresponds to what we're calling science, which means at the same time the exclusion of reason, which was classically understood as the thing which told you what it was to be of a place and what it was to know the possibility of that place and the perfection of that place. So in this sense, the problem is that way of thinking reason, which has been around, was there for more than like 1,000 years in the grove of academus, in the in the academy that Plato set up, and then for another 1,000 years with the Catholic universities. This sense centers on another kind of abstraction, which is saying, when I say a tree, when I say an apple, when I say a blade of grass, I'm only focusing on that, and I leave out the ground around it, the air around it, everything. I leave out the whole world. So aren't I making an abstraction simply by focusing on idea has it appeared already idea already before Plato in ancient Greek meant something like you have a painter paint something, and there's the idea of the apple on the painting. So it meant already an image of something, sort of, and it meant already a kind of thing. So we have different ways of understanding what a kind of thing is. For instance, Leo Strauss glosses Platonic idea, the basic ground of the Platonic idea, you see, because there's Platonic idea in what we're talking about as a phenomenon, and then there's theories about what Platonic idea means, such as the famous theory of participation. And then supposedly there's actually 4 theories within Plato, but we focus on the Parmenides, the one that appears in the Parmenides with the young Socrates talking to Parmenides and Zeno about the participation. I think we focus on that part because Aristotle told us that that's the main one that Plato really believed. Although we get a different picture from the 7th letter, I believe, and Heidegger holds more with the 7th letter interpretation of the idea. That being as it may, this idea of snatching out one being from the whole of the swelter of life is a kind of abstraction also. So then again, we have another field. This field, Leo Strauss speaks of the citizen's understanding. When we speak in the vernacular, in the vague way we use words in the vernacular, abstraction can mean all kinds of things. And sometimes it just means like, I don't want to listen to what you're saying, it's too abstract, or it's an excuse for not thinking, or it can just mean like you're talking nonsense or whatever. Abstract has a very vague meaning in the ordinary language, and then you get particular communities that are using the word in a certain sense, and sometimes those communities become totally dominant, and then, for instance, the idea of reason and rationality, which were originally these small niche things but worked out over thousands of years, and these communities spread to everyone. And okay, let me bookend that with in Kafka, we have a statement of the abstract, which isn't exact, which is from, I guess, this sort of infinitely strange vision of Kafka. So not any of the points of not the popular or citizens' understanding, not the technical understanding of some school, but the understanding of this whatever wisdom we could, if we understand Kafka as a poet, we could say whatever wisdom is in literature or poetry. In the trial, which was written, I think, right after World War I began, there's a statement of these accusations. The main character, Joseph K., is saying, these accusations against me are so abstract that I can't even see how they apply to me. So there's this whole field sweltering around somehow in the whole novel. You know, he's woken up and he's arrested, and then he wonders, has somebody slandered me, etc., etc. Why is this happening? And it's so abstract. What's happening, he says, I can't even see that it applies to me. So in this way, so let's leave it at that as a reflection, and go forward under the, let's leave it at that.